Canada's ambassador to the U.S., Kirsten Hillman, says the U.S. government is holding the program hostage. Ambassador Hillman is in Washington. Hi, Ambassador. Pleasure to welcome you back to the program.
Hi, Vashti. Great to be here.
Ambassador, what is the legal barrier or impediment to providing American officials working in Nexus offices in Canada with immunity?
So what's happening right now is that the U.S. is asking for their agents who work in Nexus enrollment centers to have the same immunities as their officers who work in pre-clearance. In other words, so that they would be exempt from Canadian jurisdiction for civil matters, for administrative matters, and for some criminal matters while they are performing their functions as Nexus enrollment centers. So these administrative functions of doing interviews and paperwork and that sort of thing. That's a fundamentally different task than what pre-clearance officers do. Pre-clearance officers, as people may well know, are within the secure zone of airports. They are clearing passengers through U.S. Customs that are on their way and imminently going to depart for the United States. So they're clearing them through customs in a customs, context.
So they're different, but I guess what I'm wondering is, what is the barrier? Is it just because the functions are different? Like, do you have an actual legal opinion that asserts that there is something nefarious that would happen if they were granted that immunity?
Well, I guess what I would say to that is for Canada to abandon legal jurisdiction over people that are in our territory is a very significant step. It's a big deal. And therefore, we negotiated through an international treaty with all of the parameters that come around that. This particular exemption for specific functions that are happening at airports in secure zones for customs officers that are fulfilling customs functions. It's just not something that can be granted for any kind of function, doing any kind of role. And so the legal impediment has to do with our ability to exempt people who are in Canada from the reach of Canadian law. And maybe I could just say, and I think it's really, really important to say, we have the greatest of will to try and find a workaround here, to try and find something that works between Canada and the United States. So what they're asking for is something that's very difficult, may not be possible for us to do. That doesn't mean there isn't a solution. And what we're just saying is, let's work on that solution. We will put all our efforts into finding it. But in the meantime, please send your agents back to the United States, to Canada, open up the enrollment centers so that we can deal with this ever-growing backlog.
And I want to ask you about both those points in just a second, but on the point of not extending this to just anyone, it's not necessarily just anyone, right? These are officials operating in an official capacity, just in somewhere that isn't the airport.
Yeah, but it has to do with what they're doing, right? It has to do with the functions that they're doing, and whether those functions are functions where we can say this is a kind of a function that rises to the level or meets criteria that would allow us to consider to exclude them from the reach of Canadian law.
Is there some kind of practical example you could provide Canadians of what might, something that could be done that by someone who was granted that immunity that would be of a negative consequence to Canadians? Is there some practical thing you could tell us about that?
Well, I think that just the basic principle is that we want to apply Canadian law to people that are operating and working in Canada. And if we're going to step away from that principle of the sovereignty principle of applying our own law within our own territory, those exclusions need to be very well tailored and for a very specific purpose. And folks operating in an airport, fulfilling a U.S. customs function that are essentially admitting people into the United States through this custom function was deemed to be appropriate. But it doesn't mean it's appropriate in other circumstances.
Is the Canadian position a hard and fast no on this? Is there no wiggle room right now? The position is no.
No, I mean, the position is we want to talk this through. We want to see how we can find something that will work for both sides. That's what we want to do. And we're eager to do that. And by the way, I just want to be clear, there's every indication that the U.S. is eager to do that with us. So we're working on that together in a spirit of collaboration and trying to figure this out. So I don't want anyone to think that they're not talking to us about this. We want to work it through with them. But while we're working it through, we are very concerned about this growing backlog. And while we're working it through, we want to give the message that this is not a small thing. This is a big, there has been, some who have commented out there, this is easy, Canada should just do this. It is not easy. It is complicated and it is legally challenging, and therefore it will likely take some time to figure out. So while we do that with all the greatest sincerity and effort, let's make sure that this program that both countries hold dear. Minister Mendicino met with Secretary Mayorkas a few weeks ago, and one of the first things that Secretary Mayorkas said was he's deeply committed to Nexus. He feels it's very important. 44 million Canadians traveled to the United States in 2019, and it's important. It's important for the tourist industry, their business industry, and it's important for Americans. So we're both very committed to the program. We need to work out this particular request. But while we're doing that, let's make sure that the policy or the program can continue to operate in Canada and that we don't have this growing backlog.
And just Ambassador, quickly though, and with great respect, a challenge point on the quickness with which the government is moving on this. My understanding is the request for this started back in 2015. Yeah, so I'm aware of the fact that before COVID, officials were talking about this. But that conversation was, U.S. making its request, Canada saying this is difficult. And it was a conversation that was being, pursued pre-COVID, and it didn't get to a resolution. It didn't get to a resolution because it's a challenging issue. So it has been something that has been discussed for a while. It is something that hasn't yet reached its conclusion. But both sides, are trying hard to do that. And while we're trying hard to do that, we think that it's important not to unilaterally essentially stop the application of the Nexus enrollment in Canada. Is it possible that the U.S. took such a drastic move now because there had been so little movement and perhaps the perception of a lack of political will over over the first 5 years, I guess, of those requests being made? I don't know, but what I would say is Canada and the U.S., we work collaboratively on border issues. I can't even spend the last 3 years talking to the United States about border management and border issues every week, several times a week at times. And it is an incredibly strong and robust relationship. And we solve problems together, we talk openly with each other, and we work on stuff together. And we want to do the same on this. We want to be able to be at the table working on it together, not in a situation where something that is important to both of us has ground to a halt, at least in the Canadian enrollment centers, while we try and work through something that's fairly complex. I feel that it's important that we understand that the relationship overall on the border is terrific. And I think that's maybe why in moments like this, when we're a little more clear and direct about something that's frustrating us, people find that surprising. But that's what good friends should be able to do, right? Good friends should be able to talk to each other openly and plainly when something is they're finding it frustrating, and that's what we're doing. Just one final question then, actually, on the relationship where the border is concerned. Some point to this example here as an example of kind of asymmetry, right? The other example they're pointing to is the fact that the vaccine requirement still exists in the United States while Canada has dropped it for people coming into our country. Have you made a specific request of the administration in the U.S. to drop that requirement for Canadian travelers? No, I have not. The principle under which Canada and the U.S. have operated on health measures during COVID is to try and keep each other as informed as we possibly can in the ever-changing environment that was COVID, with respect to the science that we are learning, with respect to the advice that we're getting from our scientists and our experts, and what measures we might be taking in relation to that.
where we are able to coordinate and do similar or the same things, we tried to do that. But we also really respected, when it comes to public health measures, that each country has to make the decisions that it feels are correct.
Okay, Ambassador, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thanks very much. Nice to talk to you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.